Welcome to the 69th episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm Atoves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to recap our win over Rice. Let's get started. The Roadrunners started out on offense like the weather. Cold and murky. After punting on the first offensive drive, UTSA stalled in the end zone in their second drive, settling for a 26-yard field goal from Chase Allen. After another punt, the Roadrunners seemed poised to score, but instead, an uncharacteristic fumble by Oscar Cardenas led to a turnover in the end zone. Finally, on their fifth offensive drive, Frank Harris connected with Josh Cephas for a touchdown. Fortunately for the Roadrunners, the defense started out strong, only allowing Rice to score one touchdown to give UTSA a 10-7 lead heading into halftime. The second half felt like a different game, as the Roadrunners were dominant on all three phases of the triangle. After the defense forced Rice to go 3 and out, the offense scored a rushing touchdown from Robert Henry on their first possession. On Rice's next possession, consecutive sacks from Trey Moore led Rice to punt again. Building on that momentum, Chris Carpenter had the most explosive play of the game, returning the punt 50 yards for a touchdown. The Roadrunners would add another touchdown run from Rocco Griffin and a 47-yard field goal from Tate Sandell to seal the victory 34-14 over Rice. UTSA improves to 7-3 overall and 6-0 in conference play. Before we get into the game, let's just say our thoughts go out to Willie McCoy. His injury looked really scary on the field as he was stabilized and taken to the hospital on a backboard. But as of Monday, the reports were positive, and it sounds like he's just being held out now out of practice as a precaution. So looks like things are, moving in the right direction. Maybe his injury wasn't as serious as it seemed at the time. So all really positive things.
Absolutely. And I think what's kind of interesting, too, is if you look at the PFF grades, he was the highest grade on offense. And It just felt right. I think, in his limited time, he's playing well. So
yeah, absolutely. He's not on the depth chart for this week, but maybe we'll see him. If not, it sounds like we'll definitely see him in the Tulane game.
Yeah, we'll probably need him there too. So.
All right, let's talk about this military appreciation game.
Okay.
Some good and some bad here, and outside of the actual play on the field. During the tailgate, there was this surprise flyover that we really weren't expecting, and it was kind of a nice touch.
Yeah, it was cool. Obviously, it'd be really cool over a non-covered field, but I prefer it this way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where we could be dry inside a dome stadium.
Sure. And then, we get into the field, and they chose to bring the game ball down by rappelling from the ceiling.
Which they've done before.
Yeah.
That's not the issue.
No, the issue was not that they did that. It was their choice of music as they did that. I mean, so the song was Fortunate Son, which it's not a positive military song. It's an anti-war anthem. And it just was an interesting choice of music. I'm going to hope that maybe an intern selected it. I don't know.
I think we just have to realize what the meaning of a song is before we put it out.
Right.
And it's an old song, so it's not like you could say, oh, this was just released about a month ago. So
yeah, that's why I'm thinking maybe it was an intern, because they're like, oh, I've seen this in a movie before, it sounds cool, not knowing the history or not having Googled what that song is all about. I mean,
there have been a lot of songs like this that people just still play because they're like, oh, I just love the message of the song. It's like, but do you really know the message? Born in the USA. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whew. All right, you ready to get to the game?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, usually you tell me, hey, what were your thoughts? And usually I tell you, oh, pretty much what I saw at the game was exactly what I thought I saw. I saw what I saw, right? But not this time. I think, it was totally different what I saw and when I rewatched. Mm-hmm. I felt like UTSA kind of looked a little vulnerable. You kind of talked about they came out, kind of like the weather, cold and murky. And I felt like they just almost came out a little too low energy, I guess I should say. But, on rewatch, I really felt like they came out more like a babysitter, right? Let the kids run around, get all their energy out, first half, and then in the second half, you just put them to sleep. And that's pretty much what they did to Rice, right? Because you talked about in your recap that, we kind of sluggish the first half. Rice was like really being physical, and then in the second half, UTSA just comes out ultra dominant,
right.
Kind of like a babysitter, right? Put them to sleep. You're the adult. You tell these kids where they need to go, right? I say this because I thought Rice linebacker Myron Morris, who's a redshirt junior, summarized it just close to that. Maybe not as funny as I'm trying to make it, but
yeah, I don't recall a quote about babysitters, but sure.
It's gonna land. I think our execution in the first half, we emphasized the physicality we needed to be successful today, and I thought we had that flowing coming out of the first half, knowing we needed to be the hammers and putting them on their heels early. I think it's just about keeping that going for 4 quarters. There's times when we're just very inconsistent, and I think that's the story of the game. Myron and I agree. That's exactly what happened. You ran out of juice. You didn't have the same energy in the second half, and it was clear from the very first snap that it was not the same Rice that we had seen in the first and second quarter. And it kind of, unfortunately, is a story of the Bloomgren era, right? Mm-hmm. Like, he wants to be physical. He wants his teams really, well, he calls it an intellectual brutality, right? But he wants them pushing other teams around. They're smart guys, right? Like, they're not going to be the most athletic. They're not going to be the strongest. But if they can push some teams around by getting leverage, by doing what's necessary, yeah, you can get into some wins. And that's kind of what it's been like with Bloomgren, right? Mm-hmm. Like, sometimes you find that surprise win. That surprise win has never been with UTSA, though. Though I will say that, as we kind of talked about it being physical, we thought that the refs kind of let it get a little bit too physical in that first half.
Yeah, I mean, Rice certainly, again, they were trying to play very physical, but because UTSA is just bigger, faster, stronger than them, it almost came across in more of a reckless manner. There were, hands to the face mask. There was that vicious face mask penalty on Robert Henry where, Robert Henry's head kind of swung around to the side, and it just really looked like it could have been a very dangerous play and that it could have led to an injury for him. He's just lucky that he didn't get hurt.
Right, which was coming after Willie McCoy, right? So therein lies the problem again, where you're like, okay, we just lost one guy. Like, are we really going to lose another guy because you're being that reckless? So yeah.
And I think that kind of also sort of played into the inconsistent approach from the offense,
Right. I would agree with that. And I think, seeing some plays, there was clearly, the refs just didn't seem like they wanted to throw flags.
No.
It felt more like they just wanted to get out of the dome, right? And I don't understand why. It's not like it was a beautiful night, right? It was still kind of raining, so yeah, what are you getting to?
Sure.
But even to that, it just kind of came down to, I think, what we've always talked about, which is a tale of two halves, right? But this time, the 24 unanswered points came in the second half.
Yeah, there have been times in UTSA's history where we've talked about them being a second half team. And, last week I joked about, well, no, apparently we're a first half team. And
yeah.
I don't know, maybe they were like, yeah, okay, well, we'll prove you wrong.
Clearly. I'm going to say clearly they listened and they said, oh, Atos, you think we're a first half team? We're going to show you. We're going to be a second half team. Yeah. All right. Let's get to the defensive review. Keys for the game. First one was force Rice to throw off it in order to pressure quarterbacks JT Daniels and Chase Jenkins. Here's the deal. Neither of them played.
Yeah, totally weren't expecting to see AJ Padgett just because Bloomgren had mentioned that he'd been injured, and Chase Jenkins was the one who went in for JT Daniels in the last game, so kind of surprised to see AJ Padgett, although, I think he played as well as he can.
I thought so too. He dropped back about 38 times. However, he was sacked 6 times. He had a quarterback hurry, and he had to scramble 4 other times. I felt bad for him because really what it really came down to was, especially in the second half, he took snaps, and it just felt like he already had Trey Moore in his face, or he had a defensive lineman in his face. There was just moments where this defense just looked like they were just playing with them. Like, we're gonna go half speed, and we're still gonna get to you like that. Mm-hmm. It was it was a lesson. Speaking of lessons, The other key here was to finish their tackles. And that was the biggest thing, was that I saw a lot, especially in previous Rice games, where they've got some big gains, or the fact that they kind of wriggled out of tackles, or, teams try to one-arm them. And I'm going to give credit here to the defense that they were disciplined. Even though it felt like it was sort of a sluggish first half, the defense was dominant from the first half to it was I thought a pretty complete game by this defense.
Yeah, and the other thing is we didn't necessarily see the response from the defense. It kind of got a little bit chippy, or Rice was trying to make it chippy, I guess I should say, but you didn't see that response back from the defense, and that's been one of the things that we've kind of critiqued different players on at different times, and nobody really had that kind of response that led to a penalty or any, really negative play for us. That's
a great point, because I also feel like, this is supposed to be the rivalry game, right? And it just doesn't. It felt like
the American rivalry. Yeah.
It felt like Rice was trying to potentially say, we are your rivals, but I don't know. Again, we don't really want to get too much into what we discussed last week, but there just doesn't have that. It would be one-sided, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't feel it. I don't think you really felt it.
No, I think the only one who did was that, what was his name? Landon Ransom Gultz, the one who was, talking about how we don't like UTSA in the press conference ahead of time,
Absolutely. So Rice scores on their last drive of the first half, which gets it to 10-7 at halftime, as you spoke about. Ransom Gels caught a 20-yard pass. I think it was like the second play or third play of that drive. And then Paget scrambles, and Ransom Gels flops, I guess, in a way. To me, he flopped, but, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I guess I would fall down too if Brandon Matterson hits me, but
sure.
Brandon Matterson's not a small guy.
No.
He's a very strong guy too. So yeah, like I said, I think I would go down.
Well, it was kind of funny too that the announcer said, well, maybe Matterson hit him because of his comments at the press conference. Like,
it was a stretch, but it was fun.
Yeah.
I thought the announcers were having some fun with this game, and I thought they did really well. But yeah, Mr. Ransom Gels, you were such a contributor and got past our cornerbacks, who he pointed out he was faster than, so many times that both of his catches came on the last drives of each half, which coincidentally was a bad defensive drive in the last drive of the first half for UTSA defense, and then trash time.
Right.
He scores. He catches another touchdown. Catches another pass, and it turns out to be a touchdown pass. Yeah, that doesn't sound like contributor or making an impact on the game.
Yeah.
Hence why you lost 34-14. This UTSA defense allowed 229 yards. Coincidentally, they allowed 230 in the rain last year. 150 of these yards, though, as I kind of already mentioned, last two drives of each half. Trash time in the second half, first half, like I said, bad drive. On those two drives, A.J. Paget was 8 for 10 for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns. Otherwise, in all the other drives, 9 for 18 for 64 yards.
Yeah.
Just absolutely good defense by UTSA. Getting to Paget, holding them to less than 80 yards on 9 drives. And then making stops, essentially not allowing Rice to score on 9 out of 11 drives. It's the same story that we've seen with this Rice team in the Traylor era. And really, for a while in this rivalry or this matchup with Rice, it's for a long time, it's just Rice just hasn't found success. I will say, though, you got to knock them a little bit. Is it a knock, though? Allow the second and third touchdowns to Rice in the Traylor era.
Yeah.
That's how nitpicky we are, right?
Yeah, I'm sure they hate the fact that they've allowed any touchdowns to Rice, but...
Sure.
Yeah, the fact that Rice has only scored 3 touchdowns in 3 games is pretty impressive.
It is. It really is. Good job, Jesslep. Good job. Another good job goes to Trey Moore, right?
Yeah, he is now tied with Marcus Davenport for career sacks at 22, and he's got at least 3 games left. Could be 4, but at least 3. So, pretty impressive. Definitely going to break that.
Yeah, the offensive lines that he's going to be facing not all of them are great. At least the next one isn't very good. So, we could see it fall on Friday night. Not guaranteed, but another guy that I thought had a great game, Jamal Liggin. You had it's funny because we joked about it, and I gotta say, they've got to be listening to us if you brought up Jamal Liggin and said he's been kind of quiet this season.
Are there any other players that we want to like amp up and have a good game? I can just trash him now, you know?
Maybe the secondary? I don't know, because
Give me a list. Come on, Nick Troy. I haven't heard anything from you in the last couple of games.
Not since the FAU game?
Yeah, since you're getting your interception. So, what do you got?
Where are you at, Nick Troy? Defensive line also had just a fantastic game. One moment that was really cool was Ty Leonard. I thought that he was double teamed, but on rewatch and then seeing Jared's breakdowns that he has every single week, our guy Ty Leonard was actually triple teamed. Mm-hmm. And essentially, Trey Moore gets in there. I think it was Trey Moore. Forces a fumble. Someone got on there and forced a fumble. But Ty Leonard took out 3 guys. That is the future, everybody. And it's just great to see. It's great to see our defensive line just causing havoc. Other than that, I mean, you have some great moments, I think, with Danye, forced fumble, recovered by Ron Triplett, and one other part of the game. And then Nick Booker-Brown. I thought it was a fumble recovery. But
everybody did. Even the announcer said they couldn't imagine that they had indisputable evidence to overturn it, but apparently those refs saw something.
I do have to say here, we usually have some sort of like kind of notes that we have to go after here, but can we just talk real quick about the fact that we've been talking a lot about this defense over the last few games.
Right.
Something that we normally have never done on this podcast. Usually I'm quick to go on Frank and like nitpick him or go, hey, he deserves kudos for everything that he's done. But this season just feels different in that we've just really had a lot of gushing things to say about the defense.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. And there's, there have been games and moments where obviously we didn't, but,
right.
You go back and you look at this game. I mean, again, they held Rice to 1 touchdown in the first half. They held them scoreless in the third quarter and almost all the way through the fourth quarter until, like, the very last minute. So, honestly, when your offense is taking a while to kind of get moving, that's what you need from that defense, is you need them to hold the other team so that they're not scoring, and gives your offense a chance to kind of get back in the rhythm,
Which is funny because, listening to JJ and Greg Luca on their post-game recap, Luca said pretty much the same thing. Like, we thought this defense was going to be pretty special.
Yeah.
And it's really looking like it is.
Yeah, we're kind of back to like what we saw from Houston and what we saw from Texas State in the first couple of games of the season.
And it's really cool to see. And we find out that Jess Lepp is one of the Broyles Award finalists. Longtime Lepp fan here. I've never said a bad word about him, but I
think you're going to start calling him potential at some point. So Tyke.
Oh man.
All right, let's talk about special teams.
Okay.
That was a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
I mean, there were some. To start with the highs, Tate Sandell got his first field goal. That was great for him. It's kind of an interesting move to see a coach put in a second string kicker, at the end of a game. At first, I didn't even realize that it was Tate, just went in, kicked the field goal. But it was a 47-yard field goal, which pretty impressive.
Interesting is what he missed at Houston.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's weird to have brought in a kicker. I know everybody says that, but we routinely have 2 kickers when we travel as well. Tate's always handling kickoffs. Right. Chase Allen's handling the field goal kicking duties. And Traylor has said it's because he doesn't want to wear out his kicker. Mm-hmm. I'll take it for his word, but it really was a good moment, especially for you, because you're such a Tate Sandell fan.
Absolutely. And I'm sure it was a huge confidence boost for him as well. It sounded like Coach had assumed that Tate was going to win that starting kicker position, and then Chase, just kind of came in really strong at the end. And so it's great that he's giving Tate that opportunity to build up his confidence again,
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about Tate is just the fact that I think it's cool to have two kickers, have a veteran there that you could potentially go back to, but develop this younger guy who certainly, boosts his confidence, but he looks like a guy that could handle both and not even sweat it.
Yep. On the punting side, all the punts were within the 20-yard line. We had that kind of trickeration where they had the fake field goal / pooch punt instead, which was a little interesting.
It was cool, but looking back at it, there was an opportunity. It looked like, and maybe, I'm just going to throw this out there, if we had had Tate Sandell out there, maybe Lucas actually throws it to Tate because Chase Allen was breaking free.
Yeah.
And if he just kind of rainbows that out there, we catch Rice off guard. But, I mean, maybe we save it for later.
But it is interesting that we had last year when we played Rice, the pooch punt where like it looked like we were going to go for it on 4th down, and then we had Brady like punt it.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, maybe it's
something
just something
about
with Rice,
yeah.
But anyways.
Woo, here's where the rivalry starts, right?
That's right. On special teams.
Yeah.
And then you have Chris Carpenter, who, you go from this moment where it's like, okay, Carpenter, kind of muffed the punt again. Like, what's going on here? Should we replace him? But that means you're going to have to bring in Josh Cephas because William McCoy's injured. And what does that mean? And then it's like he redeems himself in the best way, right? He scores the most explosive play of the game, really, by scoring this 50-yard touchdown.
Absolutely. And here's the thing is, I thought it was interesting that Traylor said afterwards when he was asked about it, he said, you just tell him to go make the next play, to go out there and do that. Okay, it's great coach speak. But don't you think that at some point he said, we're playing Rice, son? Like,
yeah.
You shouldn't be muffing the ball against Rice. You're gonna go out there. You're gonna catch this ball and you're gonna make a play.
Well, side note, I kind of feel like that was Traylor's halftime speech, right? Like, kids, we're playing Rice. Like, what is happening here? This is not Tulane. Like, did you guys get the team colors mixed up? Like, what are we doing? Anyways, Zay Frazier also had the penalty on the punt return, and then he recovers Carpenter's muff punt. So, again, you've got this kind of like back and forth where highs and lows on special teams. Just a little inconsistent, but some great moments.
Yeah, and nothing too bad that we couldn't overcome.
No.
Fortunately, all right? All right, let's get to the offense. Keys of the game were use run to set up the play action game. Well, ran the ball well as usual, even though Kavorian was out, which we'll get into here in a second. But, again, what great depth we have at running back, and what an asset to making this offense much more dynamic this year. On play action, Frank was 7 for 9 for 108 yards. Just efficient, right? Like that. Right. That's exactly the Frank that we love. And the fact that Frank really excels in play action, I'll talk about a little bit here in a second, but just chef's kiss. Challenge the linebackers to cover tight ends was the other key. The tight ends were targeted 4 times, and they got 2 catches for 21 yards, all by Oscar. I'll say this, the linebackers, and just the Rice defense overall just seemed tired in the second half. They were done having to chase either tight ends, wide receivers, and get hit again by Rocco or Robert Henry. The offense put up a total of 381 yards, which was 199 rushing, 182 passing. In my opinion, it should have been more. But Traylor likes Mike Bloomgren, so he didn't want to, quote-unquote, run up the score.
Yeah.
The problem here, though, is that this is the time when UTSA should be making the case that they're the top G5 team because a New Year's 6 bowl bid is within reach, honestly. I don't believe that they would get that bid, but you still got to be able to make that case. And, I think part of the problem is because Traylor calls himself a Texas high school football coach, and you just don't embarrass people, and you don't try to make a case for the postseason because you win a postseason berth outright. So it's just different here, right?
And even setting aside the New Year's Six Bowl, the fact that we don't know if there's going to need to be a tiebreaker or tiebreakers at the end of the American Conference, just based on the fact that, SMU, they could lose to Memphis. Memphis is a good team. there's kind of multiple scenarios that would happen. And one of the things they're going to look at is that ranking at the end of the day. So we need to have these marquee wins. And based on who we're playing right now, you're not going to necessarily have a marquee win.
Right.
But you can make yourself look better by having significant margins of victory. And if we don't do that, then we could be on the losing end of a very heartbreaking tiebreaker.
To add to that, we've talked about the fact that people, when they rank in the polls, are just going to see what the score was. And so if they just look at Rice and they say 34-14 against Rice, wow, okay. Let's be honest. This could have been another 45-7 win, another 50 to something win. But like I said,
we'll talk about Tulane and the fact that they have these very small margins of victory.
Right.
So we need to have a much larger one.
Well said. And I think looking back after last week's game, just to bring us back to the Rice game, Frank again had some pedestrian stats. Here he was, 15 for 24, 175 yards, 1 touchdown. He ran it 6 times for 31 yards. Again, for the second consecutive game, if you're just looking at his stats, you're like, ho-hum, right? It's no big deal. But it's just such a luxury to have, who we'll talk about here in a second, Robert Henry and Rocco Griffin, that we really don't need him to be really dynamic guy that has to run around and make plays. We just need him to make the right decisions in the RPO game. And really, we just need his on-field leadership and his experience. That's the big thing. Looking back at last season, Frank in this game against Rice went 11 for 14 for 103 yards, 2 touchdown passes, 7 carries for 124 yards, 3 touchdowns. He, as you have said many times before, was essentially running back 1A last season and seasons before. Now without that, you see a Frank, honestly, you're seeing him getting much more healthy, and you're seeing that he's not getting those little nicks that he would just kind of, I would say, just pile up by the end of the year.
Yeah, and he can still have those explosive runs.
Absolutely,
I think he had a 31-yard run in this game.
Yes.
And part of it was, he looked very quick, he looked very healthy, but we don't have to depend on that.
Right.
So that when he does it, I think now it's going to take defenses by surprise. They were a little bit more prepared to see that in the past, but he really hasn't been running, so now you can kind of catch him a little off guard.
And you notice that they don't really, a lot of the opposing coaches don't really say that anymore. They're they talk about the fact that he can, but they mostly follow that up with, but I know he's been injured.
Right.
So, yeah, everybody is watching, and great point there, because I really feel like, the more we talk about the running back production, you look at Rocco, 12 rushes for 81 yards, 1 touchdown. Robert Henry, 19 carries for 63 yards and 1 touchdown. Again, just a balanced effort from both running backs where neither one is really getting worn down. Both are making some big plays. But I have to say, Robert Henry, I think you need to watch out with that dancing.
Yeah.
Because it feels like you're dancing around. I kind of said it last week. This week, I felt like you noticed it a little more too.
Yeah, there were certainly times when you could see him trying to kind of change direction back and forth and then getting caught behind the line of scrimmage or maybe only getting a yard or two, where it was very noticeable where Rocco would make one cut and then kind of run, and just seemed like he was a little bit more productive in his runs. Yeah,
I would add decisive there, which I think with the experience that Rocco has, it makes sense. But I just like seeing him scoot. There's just something to him, And I think it's just because, we talked about it last week that he was still getting over some injuries, but I just like the way he just gets around. And, it's such a great sight to see the three-headed monster when we have it, but to see Rocco scooting around just as, Robert Henry does and Kavorian does, man, it's just so much fun.
Yeah.
I would be remiss, though, finish talking about this offensive side of the ball for UTSA if I don't bring up Ty Key, who I told you started out slow, had 2 great tiptoe catches.
Yeah, totally impressive. At one point it was very frustrating because it just seemed like Ty Key was not on his game, and he didn't have a great game last week. Just seemed like, okay, this just isn't his, maybe he's in a funk or something's going on. And then those 2 very impressive catches, that the body awareness that he had to make sure that he was in bounds. It was really again, one of those moments where you look at Taiki and you're like, that's it. Can you just do this every single time?
Right.
You know, because that's a frustrating part about him. He is very talented. He has great body awareness, but you just don't see it every single play.
And that first catch that he made, you know, obviously gets reviewed, but then they come back and say, no, it's confirmed. When I saw it happen, which was pretty much in front of us, it was tough for me to even judge it because
you couldn't really
we were
see
kind of blocked. And I didn't see, or neither one of us, I think, saw his foot dragging. It wasn't until you actually see the replay, which was weird that they weren't playing it on the dome. I was like, this means it's going to get overturned.
Sure.
This sucks. But then you finally see the replay and you're like, come on, man. That's some nasty stuff. That is some great stuff. And then he does it again later in the drive, and it's just, all right, Taiki, we get you. You just want to do a little bit of tiptoeing on the field tonight. So great stuff overall. I think looking at all three sides, like you said, by the second half, it was just all three sides of the triangle coming together, and you see this team just playing so well on defense, special teams, and offense. All right, let's get to our South Florida preview. Coming up here Friday night, spreads up to 20 points.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive that it's gotten to that point. Like, Vegas is expecting a blowout here.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk real quick about their head coach, first-year head coach, Alex Golesh. He's a former Tennessee offensive coordinator.
But I'd also like to mention that he's a former tight ends coach from Iowa State.
Of course you would. Of course you would. Because if you look at his coaching staff, it is littered with former Matt Campbell assistants that he worked with at Iowa State and then waited until he got this head coaching position to even pluck some of them away. Some of them he did take with him to Tennessee when he was there, but yeah, it's littered with I think a strong staff, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
I really think that he and South Florida are gonna be really good in the future because just the way he talked through his press conference was just it was very Traylor-like. There was a lot of stuff from early on in Traylor's career at UTSA where you see him get to the mic and you're like, wow, that's our head coach and he's gonna do some good things. I see the same, with Alex Golesh.
But a little less gimmicky, maybe?
Yes, because I loved his comment about possibly being bowl eligible if they beat UTSA on Friday. He shrugged it off and said, you got to be juiced to play a national game on Friday versus a team at the top of the conference. Then he followed it up with, is the only game on that everyone playing on Saturday is watching because essentially they're all going to be in bed. They're all going to be just winding down and they're going to be watching you play. Mm-hmm. Doesn't need to talk about receipts. Doesn't need to talk about any of the fans and how they're bashing his team because they're 5-5 or, that something else is going wrong on the team. Nope. It's all about if you're not ready to go out there and just play, this ain't for you.
Right.
Love it. Now, they have had an inconsistent season.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly been a lot of flashes of potential with this team, and I think, that's where you can see the future, particularly if Alex Golesh can get, a little bit more depth, maybe add some, infuse some additional talent pieces over, from the transfer portal or from his high school recruiting. I mean, you can definitely tell that this team is going to be competitive in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. And as we already talked about, they're looking for bowl eligibility. And he even mentioned in his press conference, I'm hoping we get 3 more games. Yeah. They definitely have the game against UTSA. And then I believe it's a game.
Charlotte.
Yeah.
I mean, you should win the game against Charlotte. We're not going to let you have the UTSA win, but you can get to your 6th win against Biff Poggi and Charlotte for sure. I mean, especially since this is a team, let's remember, who played pretty tough against Alabama at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
So end the season on a high note and just take down Charlotte, whatever you need to do.
All right, let's talk first of all about the offense. In AAC play, USF puts up 487.5 yards per game, which is second in the conference, and they scored 35.3 points per game, which is fourth, which is right behind UTSA. North Texas had similar stats before they played UTSA. And then they ran into the UTSA defense, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but they do put up the ninth most rushing yards in AAC play. but they're number one in passing yards. They live and die by the pass. And that's dangerous when you're going up against a UTSA team that wants you to try to pass, because that means they can pin their ears back, and Lep is just going to start blitzing from everywhere. Just essentially letting this defensive line dominate you. And there's problems here, specifically with their offensive line. Center Mike Lofton, left guard Andrew Kilfoyle, and right tackle Derek Bowman are graded low, and they struggle mightily in run blocking. Actually, the line as a whole struggles mightily with the run blocking, which, again, does not pair up well with the UTSA defense that is geared towards stopping the run.
Right.
And then they've got much better, and I say much better, but I mean, when you're not very good at something and you get a closer to passing grade, I guess you can say that you're much better, but they do better in the terms of the pass blocking.
Sure.
Again, these guys put up, like, essentially play fast like Tennessee did, but nothing that UTSA hasn't seen this season. I mean, they're averaging 2.79 plays per minute. Tennessee was at 2.84. Caused us problems a couple of times against Tennessee, but overall, just it's not going to be the same athletic ability that Tennessee had, right?
Right. I mean, certainly you're going to see some of the same style of play from Tennessee, but the talent level just isn't on the same level. You know, it's interesting when you look at their roster. Golish did bring in a lot of pieces from the transfer portal, but a lot of these guys that we're going to talk about, with the exception of a handful of them, I mean, they were there last year on a very bad South Florida team. So, you know, to Alex Golish's credit, he has really been able to get the most out of his team, but it's thin.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the problem that we've talked about with a lot of these teams that we've played here over this kind of October-November stretch. It's just, there's a lot of good players out there, but they just don't have the depth behind them in case they need a breather or, you know, if they go down.
Injury or something like that, yeah.
Let's start out real quick with Byron Brown, which is their quarterback. Redshirt freshman, 69% completion percentage, 18 touchdowns, 8 interceptions.
He has a long pass of 88 yards. I mean, the kid has a cannon for an arm. So, you know, he can certainly pass as dictated by his stats. The other interesting thing, though, he's a little like Frank Harris of the past in that he's their second leading rusher, though. 168 carries for 659 yards and 9 touchdowns rushing. Like, that's, you know, again, we talked about the fact that they struggle in blocking the run. This kid can run for his life, though, apparently.
Yeah, he can. He's quite athletic. And I love the comparison you made with Frank Harris in his early years, because I think that that's exactly what I was thinking too, which is he's looked at as the offense at times, which is a problem because he can be a roller coaster himself, right?
Right. I mean, again, he's a redshirt freshman, so once you get to the point where he kind of matures and makes some better decisions, I think he's going to be a really dangerous piece of this offense in the future, but fortunately this year he's just not there yet.
Yeah, and even though he has a 69% completion percentage, there are moments where the throws just aren't there. But there are other moments, like I said, roller coaster, where it's like, wow, that is a pretty pass. This guy, and that's why I say, I think, to your point, once he matures, Alex Golish may have something here in Byron Brown. Let's talk about junior wide receiver Sean Atkins. He was essentially a walk-on. He's, 69 catches, 108 yards, 4 touchdowns. He's just a pesky wide receiver. He's like this little dude that just, I think, runs good routes.
Yeah, I mean, he's only 5'10", but, he definitely is the wide receiver on the offense.
We would be remiss if we don't talk about running back Naquan Wright. They really have just a trio. A quarterback, running back, wide receiver that they count on for most of their offense. Naquan Wright, senior running back, transfer from Florida. He's got 145 carries for 690 yards, 4.8 average, and 6 touchdowns. He reminds me at times of, I think one of our running backs. I say that, and I don't want to point out just one because I feel like he has shades of each one. Obviously a senior, so because of it, he's got some experience, and you can tell when he runs. But unfortunately, his offensive line, as I said before, doesn't really block well for him, so makes it very difficult for him to really put up some yards. Let's go to the defense. It's former UT and FAU defensive coordinator Todd Orlando who leads this group. In AAC play, they give up 498 yards per game, last in the AAC. And they allow 42.2 points per game, last in the AAC again. They give up the 7th most rushing yards in AAC and the most passing yards. Mm-hmm. It's just, I don't know. Other than Alabama Temple, they've been getting torched for a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've had 3 games where teams have put over 50 points up against them. UAB, FAU, Memphis, and then Western Kentucky put up like 41 points. So they've had these moments, where it kind of comes back to their inconsistency. And when we were listening to Alex Goulash talk at the maturity level of the team, and just being able to kind of stack these, good plays against good plays and good days against good days. So they have talent, but yeah, they are just not consistent.
Not to use a transitive property, but we handled UAB and FAU easily. So, again, not trying to use it, but just as a comparison, yeah,
I mean, I
it's
think
been tough.
Both of them were 50. They had the same score. I believe it was 56 points that they each put up against South Florida.
And this defense has gotten worse since those games. I mean, those games obviously didn't help, but it's just consistently started to get worse. Key players here are cornerback Braxton Clark. Has a Tariq Woolen kind of shape to him. He's 6'4", 196 pounds. He has, in AAC play, he has 1 interception and 3 pass breakups. Just a long, lanky dude. Graded pretty well. Watched him play. Not saying that you can't pass on him, but certainly going to be a guy that's going to be kind of a shutdown, or at least going to cause problems for our wide receivers. Jalen Schuler, their senior linebacker, leads the team in total tackles at 68. And Daquan Evans, senior defensive back, leads the team in sacks and solo tackles with 35. Leads the team in sacks with 3. It's an interesting...
Right,
you pointed it out.
right?
Yeah, you pointed it out to me, and I was like, I guess they blitz him a lot. I don't know, but that would just be something that, to watch out for as well. But before we finish here with the defense, I gotta tell you, it's just weird that this team just doesn't... They have players.
Right.
But this defense just doesn't seem to play well as a unit.
Yeah, there's something that's clearly missing. And again, I don't know if it's coaching, if it's leadership, if it's depth, or just a combination of all of it. But, certainly something that I'm sure they're going to be looking at in the offseason to figure out what they need to do differently to be truly competitive. I mean, they still, this could be the most successful year that South Florida has had in a very long time if they make it to a bowl game. But there's a lot of things that they need to fix, to really be one of the top contenders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Special teams, again, kind of inconsistent. Their kicker has a 61% field goal percentage. His long's only a 45, though. He's missed 2 field goals in the 30s, 3 in the 40s. So just... a little inconsistent there. Their punting is good. They have an Australian punter, just like we do. It feels like everybody does now, right? It's kind of like the cool thing to do. His punting is just slightly better than Lucas's in terms of the overall conference standing. So, certainly when they do punt, it can be, he can be a weapon.
Sure.
But again, overall, their special teams has just kind of been somewhat inconsistent.
Let's get to the keys to victory then here. On offense for UTSA, grind their defense down with the run. I really think that even though that they've given up, haven't given up as many rushing yards, this is a UTSA offense that right now is just grinding some teams down and just not really thinking to pass. Mm-hmm. Though I would like to see Justin Burke kind of come up with some different passing plays just to see if we can get some guys open. And really start pressuring some of these other defenses as we get to the end of the season. On defense, get pressure on quarterback Byron Brown. It sounds easy. It sounds, like I talked about before, this offensive line isn't very good, but they are better at pass blocking. So it's going to be interesting to see how Lep looks at getting pressure on Byron Brown. Obviously, he's not just going to go and look at, the right tackle and, try to go after him, but he is going to try to figure out how to mix some looks at. And I would hope so, because I think it's going to be what's going to be key to this game, to make sure that you don't let Byron Brown get comfortable. So with that, let's get to our predictions for the game. I'll go first. All right, look, this is the last time we officially get to see Frank Harris, Rashad Wisdom, and so many other seniors play in the Dome wearing UTSA Roadrunner jerseys. Now, I'm proud of what these guys have accomplished. They've also obviously gotten a lot of criticisms from me at times, but, to look back at their careers and say that they have won 2 conference titles and really just the accolades that they have just put together, it's crazy to look back and say that we're not going to miss them, or that we're going to take any of this for granted. Traylor has stated that he's trying to make sure this team keeps their focus on the task at hand, which is a pesky South Florida team. It's difficult for me not to smile at Alex Golish because, as we've kind of talked about, I think he's going to find success at South Florida. I just don't believe that he and Byron Brown are going to have success Friday night, because I just can't see Frank leaving the Dome with a loss. Give me UTSA 45-27 over South Florida.
Yeah, once again, I see this as a potential trap game. It's senior night. There's lots of emotions going on. This is a team that, like you said, it's been inconsistent. They have these flashes of brilliance. They certainly can be competitive, but we absolutely should win this game. Vegas thinks that this is going to be a blowout, and they have a good reason for that. We're the veteran group. We're more talented. We've been on a roll in conference play lately. And like you mentioned, I think that Frank and the seniors are really going to want to go out with a win. I'm afraid they might let USF hang around a little bit longer than they should, but I just can't imagine that they're not going to win this game. So give me UTSA 35-21. Before we go, I guess we should talk about the elephant in the room. Jeff Traylor has been mentioned as a potential candidate for the Texas A&M job.
Kind of like Tyke's potential.
Yeah, a little bit. Depending on who you talk to, he's either a serious candidate or just a name being thrown out there. It was interesting, if you haven't listened to the recap that Greg Luca and JJ Perez did on Inside Runner Sports YouTube channel after the last game, I think you should go and listen to the last couple of minutes, because Greg Luca gave his thoughts on whether or not Jeff Traylor was really a serious candidate for the Texas A&M job, and I agree with what Greg Luca said. I think that's probably, though, the most candid I've ever actually heard Greg Luca speak about Jeff Traylor.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it was essentially every single criticism that we've had about Jeff Traylor as he's gone up to the mic. And usually, obviously he's good. He knows how to handle the room. But when he's made his offhand remarks, like there's got to be a better way of making a living. I'm just a Texas high school football coach.
District versus non-district games.
Those things, the reason that we pointed those things out was because those are the things that everybody's going to see. And he would always kind of throw it off as like, well, you say something and the media kind of runs with it. No, you don't have like some sort of major media person there, but you did say these things and you shouldn't have. Like, there was no reason for you to say those things, and we hammered him for it. These bigger schools are going to hammer him for it now. And I say that not because they're going to just outright criticize him, but they're going to think twice about having to explain, a few things about a guy, a guy that hasn't been able to beat Houston twice, a guy that hasn't been able to win a bowl game while at UTSA. And then just the way he's been with the media here, he gets a little terse at times. You've talked about the fact that he gets a little kind of testy at times when kind of challenged about stuff.
Yeah, and the way that Greg Luca asks questions of him is going to be very different than the way that the media at these big schools like a Texas A&M, a UT, those programs, their media is not going to be as friendly or as generous with him.
Absolutely.
Though, again, there are arguments that are going to seem small to some schools that when you look at these programs that really see themselves as, those blue chip premier programs, they're going to judge Jeff Traylor much harshly, against their criteria, or much more harshly against their criteria. And so, look, I'm not worried about him leaving for Texas A&M. That's just my personal stance. Could he maybe be the selection? I mean, he might be. And if he is, good for him. I just see it as being very unlikely. I think Texas A&M and their boosters paid a ridiculous, historic amount of money to get rid of Jimbo Fisher. And I think they're going to want somebody that they think is going to be able to get them a national championship right away. And that's unlikely to be Jeff Traylor just based on the pedigree that he has right now, or the resume that he has right now.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the media and how they would handle Jeff Traylor. I mean, making a comment like there's got to be a better way of making a living, like they will hammer him for it, and then he's going to regret even uttering those words. So, yeah, I mean, if you're looking at, I think, serious candidates, I know that this name will probably come up, but I think Dabo Swinney has got to be one of the guys that they're going to consider, because A&M really believes that they are Alabama Junior.
Yeah.
They haven't won a national title since, was it 1939?
1939, yeah.
So, as a guy that was a former Aggie, I can tell you that there's a lot of pride in the football team, and they're not just gonna want a guy that's been a G5 coach. They're gonna want somebody established. That's why they got rid of Kevin Sumlin and they went to Jimbo Fisher. And at this point, they're gonna go big name. They're looking to compete with Alabama and Georgia right away, just as you said. So I don't think that's the way either, but I will say that some of these smaller schools, a Baylor, an Arkansas, maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. There's just so many other teams that could come open. I think it would be interesting to see how Jeff Traylor does. And to echo your words, I'm not concerned really if he leaves. I mean, the thing is that this is not a destination job. This is a job where good coaches are going to come, have success, and then they're going to go off to bigger jobs. And I think we should always just wish them well and go, thank you for contributions to UTSA football.
Yeah, I do think that there are some jobs that might open this year or next year that certainly are going to give strong consideration to Jeff Traylor. And he's probably going to give very strong consideration back. And he might leave. And if he does, again, great. Good for him. And good for UTSA that we have a coach that somebody wants to poach.
Right.
I mean, I know that sounds, odd to say, but that is a mark of where we're at as a program when we're not just getting the coach that's going to get fired at the end of their contract. Like, we should celebrate the fact that somebody wants to steal our coach, that we're being looked at as a program that has had that level of success, and hopefully if he does move on, he does great things, and the person who replaces him can take that foundation that he's established and can move the program forward. So, but, you can't waste too much time speculating over it, because if it happens, it happens, And if there are some people in the meantime who want to donate more money to support the program because they want to keep him here, then that can only mean great things for the long-term financial success of UTSA athletics in general.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the other things that happened in the American Conference.
Okay.
This past week. SMU beat North Texas 45-21. For a moment, there looked like brief moment in time where maybe North Texas was going to come back and do us a solid and have a very competitive game against SMU and potentially pull off, that victory. But then they realized that they were North Texas, and SMU took control of the game.
Wow. Normally I'm the one that says stuff like that.
We kind of alluded to this earlier, though. Like, Tulane just survived another close game. They only beat Tulsa by 2 points. It was 24-21, or sorry, 24-22. It's interesting because Tulane is just continued to have these very, very close games, and people are questioning whether or not they should be ranked.
Well, here's the thing. If you watch the Tulane game, and we actually did, here's what they're kind of facing right now. They've essentially lost the right side of their line. Mm-hmm. I think another offensive lineman went down after they had kind of moved guys around. They lost their top 2 wide receivers during the game. I think it was early in the second quarter they had lost both of their top 2 wide receivers. They're limping towards the finish line. Mm-hmm. Not something I would have thought that I would ever say about Tulane. However, I think they're going to be vulnerable. Yeah. And I think, obviously nothing that we can control. When their guys come back, they come back. I would certainly love to play a Tulane team that was completely healthy so that if we win in New Orleans, it's more of a marquee win. But certainly things are lining up well for UTSA to continue to take advantage as long as they continue to win.
Yeah. Memphis had to go to overtime to beat Charlotte, 44-38. I was really hoping that Memphis was going to have a better showing because, again, they're playing SMU, and a lot of our hopes kind of rest on, okay, maybe Memphis can pull an upset and beat SMU, but Memphis has been hot and cold this season.
And possibly what we had thought was going to be or we thinking this game is a trap game, right?
Yeah.
So that could have been their trap game where they're looking ahead, like as you said, to SMU, and they're thinking, all right, let's just take care of Biff here and his craziness, and we'll make it through. They were taking overtime, so clearly you just can't go half-hearted out there. So yeah, it's again something that needs to be pointed out to UTSA and say, look,
yeah,
Traylor says it a lot, but you take somebody for granted, this can happen.
Yeah, UAB, perfect example. They had a great win last week, and then they just got clobbered by Navy 31-6. And East Carolina pulled off the upset and beat FAU 22-7. So good for East Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, look, FAU also is limping to the end. I mean, It's just interesting to see some of these teams with some good head coaches that are just struggling to get to the finish line. And here is a UTSA team that is beginning to surge. So it's going to get exciting. As long as we take care of business, I think we'll be fine in terms of getting to the championship game, because that's what I predicted, by the way, at the beginning of the season.
It is.
So I'm crossing my fingers. But yeah, let's see what happens.
All right, in volleyball action this past week, they had a rough weekend for the ladies. They dropped both of their games to Wichita State, but it should be noted Wichita State is ranked second in conference right now, so pretty tough competition.
Yeah, I will say though that they lost middle hitter Miranda Putnicki to injury during the first game. I had challenged our depth, obviously, and it just put UTSA in a position where, if they thought they could upset Wichita State, that just wasn't going to happen, at least not with Putnicki out. I mean, anything's possible, of course, but it just made things much more difficult to pull off.
Yeah, their next game is going to be against UAB, which is coincidentally the last in the conference. So hopefully they'll be able to bounce back and have a pretty good victory against them on Friday. They're playing in Birmingham at 7 p.m. UTSA currently is in 8th place in the conference, so kind of in the middle of the pack. 8-9, 15-13 overall. That game against UAB is on ESPN Plus if you're able to catch some of it before the football game.
Cool.
In UTSA basketball action, men have just lost 2 heartbreakers. They lost to Lamar in a dogfight, 82-90. And then the game before that was against the University of Minnesota. They lost 76-102. They really did have some good moments in that game against University of Minnesota. They did score, or they were shooting 50% at one point in time, but they just didn't have enough to really be competitive.
Yeah, this team just, I think, lacks a lot of overall talent, and because of it, you're just going to see moments like this. And the players can see it as a knock at them, but the thing is, it's just you see what's happening on the court, and we're just where we're at, all right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
I mean, there's pieces, there's talent, but one of the things that's been frustrating about these last couple of teams is that we haven't been successful at putting the right pieces together to build that cohesive team. You know, I mean, like you said, again, it's not a knock against any of the individual players. There's talent on the team. There's just not the right pieces together to really put together that successful program.
Absolutely.
And I think it's going to be challenging for them as they go through the season, but you know, these guys are playing hard. You see the effort, you see the intensity from them. So there's going to be those games that are probably pretty exciting, and you know, hopefully they'll pull off a couple of upsets, but I think it's going to be a challenging season for them as they get into conference play in particular. Next up for them is Texas State. They play Friday, November 18th at 7:15 p.m. Texas State's been one of those programs where, for whatever reason, Henson seemed to play well against them. So, you know, I think that's one of them where we may see a rebound.
Henson just looking at Texas State going, whew, there's my
number.
rival. I got you.
I got you, yeah. And then they play Houston Christian Monday, November 20th at 7 p.m. Both of those games are on ESPN+. So if you have the opportunity to watch them and support them, you know, these guys are definitely going to need all of the fan support that they can get through the season. On the women's side, they won their first victory at home against New Mexico State, 58-55. That game, again, very close, but, you know, the ladies were able to put it together right at the end.
I will say this. I really felt like UTSA should have really put the hammer on New Mexico State. It was clear to me that they were a little more talented than New Mexico State, but, you know, I will say, though, that unlike the men that have questions and they're struggling to find answers to, the women already are beginning to find some answers. Idara Udo, freshman post, has just been terrific. You know, I've gushed about her footwork in the paint. Huge block at the end of the game.
Right.
And it was a huge clean block. You know, I'm sure New Mexico State fans would try to disagree, but you couldn't hide it. I mean, that was just great play. But I would be remiss if I wouldn't talk about another freshman on the team, Asia Proctor. Oh, she looked so smooth. There were some moments that she just absolutely took the ball off a screen and just seemed like she was gliding in the air as she hit a jumper over and over and over again. She just looked good. And we sit close to the floor, so on one of the shots she made, she got past one of the New Mexico State defenders. She kind of said boom and then drilled a baseline jumper. She was feeling it that night, and I just hope that she continues to play well in order to continue to help this team on the offensive end, because I think they still need some help there without Jordan Jenkins. But I'm completely bought in on the women. I think they're going to have, as I said many times before, they're going to have a good season. This is a good team, and hopefully you support them as well, because they certainly could use plenty of fans to get that convo rollicking. And at the end of the New Mexico State game, I really felt the convo was really loud. Yeah,
I mean, and certainly it was. And I was glad that they won that game, because there were moments where New Mexico State looked like they were coming back and it was getting a little close. And we sit across from the opposing team's bench, and I had to watch that coach with her stupid jacket that she was wearing.
Bedazzled one.
Yeah, bedazzled with New Mexico State on the back of it. I mean, in the style of it, like, she really looked like she had just walked out of, like, Grease. You know, she thought she was a pink lady. It was a black jacket, but it was, like, looked like something you would have seen in that movie. And it was like, oh, my God, we have got to beat this team just because this coach and her jacket is annoying and it had, like, a weird heart on the front. Anyways. Yeah, it just bugged me.
I like this feisty Atos. It's just so much fun.
I wanted to beat that coach in her jacket, not necessarily the team. So the ladies will be going on a road stretch here next. They will be playing Texas A&M Corpus Christi Wednesday, November 15th at 7 p.m. Then they go to UT Arlington. Saturday, November 18th at 2 p.m. And then they're on the road with Texas Tech. Monday, November 20th at 7 p.m. All of those games are in ESPN+.
Awesome.
All right, well, I think that about wraps it up for us at the Hail Mary podcast. I'm A-Tobes.
And I'm the Toes.
We'll be back next week to recap our big win against South Florida.
Birds up.